Why were Black Africans historically seen as a threat? What was it about their presence, culture, or strength that sparked fear and led to centuries of negative perception? The narrative of Black Africans as a threat didn't emerge out of nowhere. It was shaded by economic systems, cultural misunderstandings, and deliberate propaganda. But why, of all the groups in the world, were Black Africans singled out and portrayed in this way? What fueled this fear, and how did it come to influence global history? To answer this question, we must explore the intersection of Africa's rich history, the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, and resistance movements. At every turn, Black Africans demonstrated resilience and strength that challenged oppressive systems. Yet, this very resilience was reframed as a threat by those who sought to control and exploit the continent and its people. Welcome to History Coasts, the channel where we uncover the untold truths and overlooked narrative that shaded our world. In today's episode, we are exploring why Black Africans were historically viewed as a threat, a story of resilience, power, and the enduring fight against injustice. Be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into history's hidden chapters. Let us begin with Africa itself, a continent of immense diversity and innovation. Before the intrusion of European explorers, Africa was home to powerful empires, advanced trade network, and cultures rich in art, science, and governance. The Kingdom of Mali, for example, rose to prominence in West Africa during the 13th and 14th centuries. Under the leadership of Mansa Musa, Mali became a global hub of wealth and scholarship. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 remains legendary, not just for its display of gold, but for its impact on economics along his journey. His kingdom was a beacon of prosperity and intellect, with Timbuktu serving as a center for learning and culture. Empires like Mali's were not anomalies. The Great Zimbabwe in Western Africa stood as a marvel of architectural achievements. The city's massive stone structures were built without metals, showcasing advanced engineering techniques. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Congo in Central Africa developed intricate political systems and engaged in extensive trade with European power, demonstrating a deep understanding of diplomacy. This civilization contradicted the stereotype that would later be imposed on Africa. However, the very strength and wealth of these societies made them targets to European power seeking expansion. Africans' resources were an irresistible prize. But controlling such a vibrant continent required more than military force. It requires a narrative, one that painted Africans as inferior, unruly, and dangerous. The transatlantic slave trade, which began in the 16th century, became a turning point in this narrative. Over 12 million Africans were forcefully removed from their homeland and subjected to unimaginable horrors. This was not passive process. African communities resisted a very stage during capture, aboard slave ships, and in the Americas. In Africa, powerful kingdoms like the Hashti and the Dahomey fought back against Europeans' incursion. These kingdoms were skilled in warfare and used their resources to defend their territories. However, internal conflicts and betrayals also played a role in enabling the slave trade, as some leaders collaborated with European power for short-term gain. On the ships, enslaved Africans resisted in ways that terrified their captors. Uprisings were frequent, with Africans seizing control of ships in desperate bids for freedom. The Amistad Revolt of 1839 is one of the most famous examples. Enslaved Africans, led by Sangipai, took over the ship and demanded to be returned to Africa, eventually sparking a legal battle that highlighted the humanity of the enslaved. In the Americas, resistance took many forms, from revolts on plantations to the formation of Mauryan community. These communities, established by escaped slaves, became centers of defiance. In Jamaica, the Marons waged guerrilla warfare against the British for decades, forcing the colonial government to negotiate treaties. But the ultimate symbol of African resistance was the Haitian Revolution. Beginning in 1791, enslaved Africans in Haiti overthrew French colonial rule and established the first independent black nation. This unprecedented victory sent shockwave through the world, inspiring enslaved people and terrifying slaveholders. Rather than acknowledging this act of resistance as a fight for justice, slaveholders and colonial power reframed them as evidence of African savagery. This narrative justified the brutal suppression of uprising and perpetuation of slavery. Africans were no longer seen as individuals with a right to freedom, but as a dangerous group that needed to be controlled. As the transatlantic slave trade declined in the 19th century, European powers turned their attention to colonizing Africa. This era, often referred to as the "scramble for Africa," was driven by industrialization and the need for resources. The Berlin Conference of 1884 formalized the partition of Africa among European nations, disregarding the sovereignty of its people. Colonization was justified through the so-called civilizing mission. Europeans claimed they were bringing progress and Christianity to Africa, framing their exploitation as benevolent. But Africans did not passively accept colonization. Resistance movements emerged across the continent, challenging the narrative of European superiority. In Southern Africa, Saka Zulu transformed the Zulu nation into a military powerhouse. His innovative tactics and discipline first posed a significant challenge to British and Boer expansion. Despite facing overwhelming odds, the Zulu nation remains a symbol of Africa's resilience. In Ethiopia, Emperor Menelik II defied colonial exploitation by defending Italian forces at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. This victory secured Ethiopians' independence and stood as a rare example of Africa's triumph against European colonization. This act of resistance exposed the fallacy of African inferiority, yet colonial powers responded with propaganda portraying Africa as violent and incapable of self-governance. The fear of African resistance became a tool for justifying harsh colonial policy, from forced labor to the destruction of cultural tradition. The late 19th and early 20th century also saw the rise of pseudoscience, which further entrenched rustic ideologies. Theories like social Darwinism claim that humanity was divided into hierarchies, with Europeans as the top and Africans as the bottom. These ideas were used to justify colonialism, slavery, and segregation. One of the most demanding aspects of these theories was their focus on physical and cultural differences. Africans were portrayed as physically strong but intellectually inferior, a stereotype that framed them as a threat to social order. This narrative influenced everything from popular culture to academic research, creating a widespread belief in African inferiority. In the United States, this stereotype fueled the Jim Crow era. Black men were often depicted as hyper-aggressive, while black women were hypersexualized. These depictions were used to justify segregations and violence against African Americans. The fear of black empowerment became a driving force behind the creation of systems designed to oppress and marginalize. In the 20th century, brought new challenges and opportunity for black Africans. The decolonization movement swept across the continent as nations fought to reclaim their sovereignty. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Patrick Lumumba in Congo, and Julius Nyerere in Tanzania became symbols of hope and resistance. However, these leaders were often viewed as threats by Western power. The ideas of united and independent Africa challenged the global balance of power. In 1961, Lumumba was assassinated under circumstances linked to Western intervention, a tragic reminder of the length to which power would go to suppress African autonomy. Even after achieving independence, African nations faced significant challenges. The Cold War turned the continent into a battleground for ideological conflict, with Western nations viewing African leaders with suspicion. This period saw the rise of military coup and the manipulation of African governments by foreign power, further destabilizing the continent. So why were black Africans historically viewed as a threat? The answer lies in the power dynamic of history. Africans represented strength, resilience, and the potential to disrupt systems of exploitation. From their resistance to slavery and colonization to their pursuit of independence and equality, Africans have consistently challenged the status quo. This challenge was perceived as a threat by those who benefited from their oppression. To maintain control, this power created a narrative that framed African as dangerous and inferior. This narrative not only justifies their action, but also sought to erase the true story of African resistance and achievements. Today, it is our responsibility to confront this misconception and honor the legacy of Black Africans. Their history is not one of threat, but of resilience, courage, and humanity. By understanding the roots of this perception, we can begin to dismantle them and celebrate the rich heritage of Africa. Let us not forget that the fear of Black Africans was never about who they were, it was about what they represented: the power to challenge injustice and inspire change. You've just uncovered another compelling stories from History Coast. The history of why Black Africans were viewed as a threat is a reminder of the strength and perseverance that shaped our world. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to keep discovering more truths from history's forgotten page. See you in the next video.